Hi, I'm John Landis. Welcome to the Apprenticeship, where today we're going to start what will be a series of videos on joinery. Thanks for joining me. Hey, welcome to the Apprenticeship, where today I'm going to start what should be a series of videos on joinery. Now, if you remember back in episode 1 and 2, I told you that the end grain of wood cannot glue, that the long grain is the surface that's gluable. And it's for this reason that all of woodworking exists in the first place. Because if you can't join wood on the end grain, we need to have a means of gluing it together or of putting it together with a joint. So today we're going to start with the most basic of joints, which is basically long grain to long grain glue up. Now, where would you need to use long grain to long grain glue up? Well, anytime that you want to take a narrow board and create a wider board with it. So the case may be in a tabletop for a coffee table. It may just be a simple tabletop for an end table or something ambitious like a dining table. Now, if you want a dining table that's say 42, 44 inches wide, there are slabs out there that exist, but not only will they be expensive, hard to come by, but they're going to be hard to maneuver. So what you'll want to do is take individual boards, say 6, 7, or 8 inches wide, and glue them up across their width on their long grain to create a wider board from a few narrower boards. That is long grain to long grain glue up, or at least edge grain. That's what it's for. You would also say do this if you were going to take a board and resaw it down the middle and book match it, open it up. You would want to glue those edges together, not only to make the panel wider, but to have a beautiful figure within that panel that you may use on a door panel or the side panel for a cabinet. Now, the reason I say this is the most basic joint in the first place, because frankly it is. All that's involved is a well-executed edge or joint and glue. So it is the most basic joint that there is. Basically, we're taking the long grain of a board and gluing it to the long grain of a board. And since you've watched episode 1 or 2, or both, or all, you know that this can be done. So let's take an example of, say, this board of walnut. Now, I want to turn this board into a panel for a door, let's say. So I've already sent this board through the bandsaw and have opened it up, and it has become a book-matched panel. So now I need these two edges to be put together, to be glued together, to make what was a 7-inch wide board into a 14-inch panel. So at first you may be saying, what joint do I need here? What am I going to need to put these things together? Well, quite frankly, because long grain can glue to long grain, the only thing you need is glue. Now, understanding that these can be glued together and that joint, thanks to the glue, is going to be as strong as the wood itself, that opens up a lot of possibilities as to where you're going to be able to glue things to make boards bigger than they were in the first place. Let's take another example. Let's say you were doing a coffee table and you wanted it to be to have stout legs, maybe 3-inch by 3-inch or 3.5-inch square legs that tapered on all 4 sides. Now, you could hope to find 3.5, 4-inch stock of 4.5 square stock, which is 16-quarter lumber. You're not going to find that at your big box store for sure, but you also may not find it at your local lumber yard. In fact, 16-quarter stock is pretty hard to come by. Maybe you'll find it in a domestic wood like cherry or walnut or maple. Maybe, but that kind of wood cut that large is not very common. So what are you going to do? Give up? No. Instead, you're going to take 8-quarter thick, 2-inch thick lumber, and you're going to do what we call a long grain book match, which essentially means we're going to take a board that's, say, 8 inches wide plus, and rip it down the middle and creating on that edge its own book match. So here's an example of 8/4, meaning 2 inches thick, cherry that started out wide like this. And I want to turn this 2-inch thick wood into, say, a 4-inch, or ultimately maybe a 3.5-inch square leg. So I would send this through the table saw, and again, much as we book matched the walnut panel into, or walnut board into a panel, we are what we call long grain book matching the edge of this. The reason for this is because, first of all, it looks pretty cool, but secondly, it's the most, or I guess I should say least obvious glue line. One thing you don't want is for this book match to be a distraction when you basically just want 4 coffee table legs. So this would be another example of putting it through the table saw, long grain book matching this, and creating a 4x4 leg for a coffee table. Now, what do I do? How do I make this a bigger board? Well, we've got 2 faces here, and these faces are long grain. So I can take this, put glue on one of these faces, put these 2 faces together, clamp them, let them sit overnight, and suddenly I have not a 2-inch thick board, but a nice square 3.5 or 4-inch square leg stock from which I can make my coffee table legs. Now, you may or may not ever need to make 4-inch square leg stock. You may or may not ever want to make a book matched panel for a door or a side panel for a cabinet. But one application where I'm positive you're going to be using long grain to long grain or edge grain glue up is when you're making a tabletop. Again, you could possibly come across 3 or 4 foot wide boards to create a tabletop, but just as rare as it is trying to find 16/4 lumber is trying to find slab cut lumber that is as wide as a table that you're going to want. So how do we do that? Well, if you watched the previous episodes on milling lumber, you know that we can take a board and face joint it and plane it and edge joint it and rip it. And it's that edge joint that, because it's long grain, can glue to the next edge joint, can glue to the next edge joint, can glue to the next edge joint to take what was a 6, 7, or 8-inch wide board, glued together widthwise to make a wider board. Now, what joint do you need? The reason I'm bringing that up is because so often I hear woodworkers come up to me at trade shows or wherever they're talking to me. If it's a neighbor, they find out that I'm a professional woodworker. They always ask me about biscuits. What biscuits do you use? Do you use the new domino cutter? Do you love biscuits? What's your biscuit joiner? And the reality of it is, yes, this shop owns a biscuit joiner. There are applications where we use a biscuit joiner, but edge gluing is not one of those applications. You do not need to have an alternate joint, which is what the biscuit joiner is, to glue up edge to edge. That is a long grain gluing to a long grain with glue in between, and that joint doesn't get any stronger. So you don't need an additional joint. You don't need biscuits. You don't need dominoes between those 2 things. Now, is it possible that sometimes you'll use a biscuit to help align the boards? I guess on occasion, but I've found that I prefer to have the ability to move the boards as they relate to each other, and the second you put biscuits in there, you're not going to be able to move them. So while right at the point where the biscuit is, it may be a nice glue up, you don't really have the flexibility of adjusting that as you're adding the clamps. So what I want to do next with you is to show you a glue up, an edge grain glue up, and we'll show you what I'm talking about as far as the long grain and the long grain gluing together to make a wider board. And therefore, that itself, the glue and the edge and the long grain, that is the joint itself. No mechanical joint, no biscuits, no dominoes, no anything, just glue and the wood itself. Okay, so for this demonstration, we're going to use the board that we book matched so that we're going to glue that together into a panel. We've chosen to show you the panel glue up, but the technology is exactly the same. If you have 4 or 5 boards that you've already milled as per our previous episodes, and you have nice straight edges and you're ready to glue that up, same exact technology. Take the information that I'm about to give you as it relates to this panel glue up and use that information on your your glue up in whatever way you're doing it. If you're doing the leg glue up that we showed you at the bench, if you're doing a tabletop glue up, doesn't matter, same technology. So we took this board that was about 1 inch thick, we cut it down its middle, and we book matched this into a nice, beautiful panel that we're going to use on the door. Now, the important thing about this joint is that the edge is well done. If you ran that edge over a jointer and you have a nice straight edge there, good enough. If you did it with a hand plane and it was a nice straight flat edge, good enough. You just want to make sure that this edge is nice and straight for the glue up. We also need to put glue onto it, and then there's going to be clamping pressure. Up for debate is how much glue. Up for debate is how much clamp pressure. Well, not so much. We don't need to slather it with glue. There is such thing as overgluing, but that's a hard thing to accomplish. There's also definitely something called over-clamping, which basically you just starve the joint of glue. If you have to clamp this thing down super hard to close a joint, you're already in trouble. It means your edge wasn't so straight in the first place. You don't want to use the clamps to close up a joint. You just want to hold it together while the glue is drying. That's the only reason for the clamps in the first place. So as you're moving forward, here's what we're going to do. We already have our two nice edges. We created this edge on the jointer and then we resawed this. Now, because we went with a thinner board, 1 inch board, and we do want to end up with a 5/16 panel, I don't have the luxury after the resaw of reflattening each of these individual boards. They moved. That might not surprise you if you've watched the previous episodes. When we cut this board in half, we relieved that tension that was in the middle, and these boards cupped a little bit. Now, did they cup such that I can't use them anymore? Absolutely not. This is going to be a 5/16 panel that in the end, after we've sanded it and thicknessed it, if it ends up with a slight cup over the whole thing, it's only 5/16 of an inch and it will easily bend into its channel, into its dado. Not a problem at all. If it's a big cup, well, that's going to be a different problem and we would not use these boards. If you started with a board that was thicker than you need and you resawed it, and you have the luxury of having the thickness to be able to re-mill these or redress these, then go back to the previous episodes to discover how can I get this board flat again. If you start with two perfectly flat boards, make sure that these edges are in really good, flat, straight shape. Then this will be a flawless glue up. So all we're going to do is take these two boards, put them onto our clamping situation, add glue, and squeeze them together. We'll show you how that goes. This is the basic, easy glue up, long grain to long grain. We have a nice edge here. We have a nice edge here that we established on our jointer. Now, we've put them onto clamps, something this long, which is about 24 inches. We're going to use 3 clamps only. We do want clamps on the extreme ends, and then we're going to put one in the middle. The amount of glue is pretty simple. Take one of the edges, just use wood glue, yellow wood glue. I do have a brand preference, but I'm not going to say it because you can have your own preference. You don't need to go by what I say. You do want to spread the glue just so it covers the whole edge. I'm not going for a particular thickness or thinness here. I'm just covering the whole edge. Is it even? No, not exactly. Also doesn't matter. You just want to make sure that you've got glue on the whole edge. Use just a regular old glue stick for that. Okay, then you put them side by side. Go ahead and move them a little bit just to make sure that the glue spreads onto the other board. And then we're going to start on one end here. I'm just going to hold them in place. Close the clamp up. I'm just going to hold these in place with my finger. Just want them to get as close as possible. I clamped it tight. You see that? Got glue squeezed out. I know that this board is together, so I don't have to squeeze any harder. You can see now that it's gapping here and way gapped here. I like to move my way up the board, mainly so I can control where this lands, so I can keep these flat. We'll put another one on here in the middle. I like to hold the pipe up off of it so that the glue doesn't react with the pipe, the metal in the pipe, and create a stain. I'm going to make sure that I have this flush where I want it, and then pull this close. Now watch as I pull the center close. We're actually going to start to see glue squeeze out up here a little bit. Not 100%, but we're going to start to see it squeeze up way up here. So I'll close it again, just trying to get enough for it to close up here. Now look what happened up. Oh, look at that. That tells me that this is a great joint. I'm 10 inches, 11, 12 inches off of this end up here, and I was able to get that to close up just with minimal squeezing here in the center. That's how I know that this joint, this edge, is a nice straight edge. We'll put the final one on there. Hard to see. We don't have to pull it any closer, but we'll go ahead and just give it a little squeeze there, but not much. And then this is a glued joint. This joint at the glue line is as strong as the wood itself right now. All right, so we've accomplished this glue up. Nice straight edge, good amount of glue, perfect amount of clamping pressure, and this board is now glued together. Some things you're gonna wanna do in a few minutes. I would give it 20 minutes, 25 minutes or so to let the glue begin to set up before I clean it off. Right now, it's just gonna be a wet mess and you're just gonna be spreading glue around. If you give it about 20 minutes, let it skin over a little bit. You can use a dedicated chisel. I wouldn't use one of my sharper, nicer chisels, but we have a dedicated chisel in the shop that isn't super sharp, but it has a nice edge. We scrape that glue along now and then just wipe it with a damp cloth, not a wet cloth. What you don't want to do is introduce water back into the joint. Water is what activates the glue, and it's what deactivates the glue, if you will. The glue works by evaporation of the moisture in the glue. If you took a wet paper towel and wiped that off, not only would you spread nasty glue around on the panel, but you would kind of slow down the curing of the glue joint. So again, give it 20 minutes or so, let the glue skin over, and then with a chisel, wipe the glue off. Same thing on the other side. More important on the other side, actually, because this panel is resting on this lower pipe. So the glue is going to react with the pipe, and it's going to leave a black spot there. So after about 20 minutes, when you know that the glue has begun to set up, I would loosen the end one, pull the panel up a little bit, maybe shove a little piece of wood under there, and then reclamp it, and that should keep the black spot off of the wood. Sometimes woodworkers will put a piece of wax paper underneath of it, underneath of the other side, anytime the glue is going to come in contact with the pipe. It works. I've done it before. It's just, for us, it's just a pain to have little pieces of stuff all throughout when I can really just fix it 15 or 20 minutes later. So this is going to be a nice, strong glue joint. That is the joint. If I had introduced biscuits, then biscuits would have been the joint. This is the edge joint. This is as strong as this joint needs to be. Adding biscuits, well, you can't do it on this. It's only 3/8 thick. Adding biscuits to a joint is not going to make it stronger. I mean, yeah, I guess it does make it stronger, but it doesn't need to be made stronger. It's kind of like taking a steel chain and saying, oh, I'm gonna wrap duct tape around this. Yeah, great. It just made it that much stronger, but the steel chain wasn't going to break in the first place. Key to this, excellent edge. Make sure your edge is nice and well executed. Put the glue on, make sure the glue covers everything, and that your clamping pressure is perfect. Now, same thing would be done in this case. Remember, this is back when we were going to do the glue up of this leg, this 8/4 stock that we were going to glue up face to face, nice long grain to long grain, to make a larger stock that we can do larger squarer legs for this coffee table. Again, this is easy. You slather glue on here, make sure that the edge is covered, put these two together, rub them together to make sure the glue is spread, and then you put this in clamps as well overnight. Then you have a nice, thick, strong, sturdy piece of wood. All right, next up, we're going to cover another joint. Again, that's 100% based in the reality that long grain to long grain glues up, end grain to long grain does not glue up. Thanks for joining me. Hope you learned something. See you next time.